I got divorced after 3 years of marriage. I was 27 at the time and self-employed, making about $60,000 a year. My ex-wife, Sarah, was 25 and a contract worker, earning around $28,000, if I remember correctly. I had a decent income, and I told Sarah that it was okay for her to be a housewife, but she wanted to continue working. We were thinking about having kids eventually, but it seemed like it was still too soon to consider it, so I respected her decision to work if it meant a happy home. However, she hardly did any housework, using her job as an excuse. Initially, she would sometimes prepare dinner after coming home, but that stopped within a month. She began bringing home takeout or pre-made meals, blaming it on increased overtime at work. As I worked from home, I took care of the cleaning and laundry, and gradually, cooking became my responsibility too. Her only chore was grocery shopping, but eventually, she stopped doing that too, and I ended up handling all household tasks. After 6 months of marriage, I started questioning the point of being married if we weren't going to have children or share household responsibilities. When I discussed this with her, she insisted.
I'm neither a servant nor a maid.
Nothing I said seemed to matter to her. When I expressed my feelings and mentioned considering divorce, she asked me to wait until she settled into her new role at work, which she had taken after our wedding. A year passed, then 2, with no improvement, despite having over 10 times of discussions. I even started recording our conversations from the third talk, preparing for the future. By our 3rd anniversary, with 2 years of no intimacy, she seemed resigned to divorce, saying,
Fine, if you want a divorce, go ahead.
By then, my reasons for wanting a divorce had changed. Suspecting something might be amiss, I hired a private investigator around the 2nd year of our marriage. It was costly, about $13,000 for a year, but it revealed that Sarah had been unfaithful even before we got married. Unaware of this, she demanded a divorce, saying,
Since you initiated the divorce, you're the guilty party. I'll take half of our assets.
She insisted on taking the house and car, $100,000, which is a half of our savings, and an additional $50,000 for alimony. She even demanded a restraining order, with a $10,000 fine for each violation. She declared this confidently and presented me with a divorce paper which she had already filled out. She claimed that since I initiated the divorce, I was the responsible party. She mentioned she could have asked for more but had compromised. I calmly confirmed with her, recording the conversation. If I had been unfaithful, would you demand more alimony?
Of course. Infidelity is unacceptable, regardless of gender. You'd owe at least $100,000, and there'd be no need to split assets.
I see, so that's what it is. I reply plainly.
Isn't that obvious? I don't like how naive you are.
At that moment, any remaining affection I had for her vanished. I decided to confront her and take action without hesitation. This house has been in my family since my father's time, it's not a shared asset. The car is registered under my company, so the same applies. She was taken aback.
Then I'll take all the savings.
She retorted. I calmly replied. Just because shared assets are off the table doesn't mean you get all the savings.
I've lived here for 3 years, I have rights to this house.
That applies in cases like eviction, not property division. Who's been feeding you this information? Your lover. I asked, naming the guy she's been having an affair with in his full name, which made her turn pale. She looked like she wanted to ask how I knew but couldn't bring herself to say more. I'll give you 2 hours to think about how you'll conduct yourself from now on. With that, I told her to go to her bedroom. Meanwhile, I gathered my lawyer, her parents, her brother, and her sister. My father had passed away, and my mother was in a care facility for Alzheimer's. Once everyone arrived, I called her to join the discussion. She arrogantly said she'd changed her mind about the divorce. That's when I dropped the bombshell. I revealed the evidence of her affair and initiated another discussion. She turned pale at the evidence but screamed,
"It's fake! It's a setup!"
Her family was confused, clinging to a faint hope that this was a mistake. "There's no chance of that. Everything written here and these photos are the truth." Realizing there was no mistake, her father apologized profusely. Beside me, my brother-in-law exploded a kick to her, yelling, "You harlot!" My mother-in-law tried to defend her daughter but couldn't find the words to do so. My sister-in-law glared at her with disdain. I started. "So, about the divorce, alimony, and division of assets, I'd like to discuss with my lawyer." I relayed the terms discussed earlier with my lawyer. The demand was for an immediate divorce, which was certain since I already had the necessary documents from my ex-wife. No division of assets, but a demand for $50,000 in alimony. Of course, her bank accounts were to be seized. My lawyer calmly explained, "This is quite a concession compared to what you have proposed. Please understand that if you don't accept, this will go to court." Hearing this, my ex-wife hastily made excuses and begged for a reconciliation. Her family also pleaded for apology. I found their persistence too much and said I'd consider reconciliation if certain conditions were met. Sarah and her family thanked me with teary eyes, seemingly misunderstanding something. My condition was that she would get $100,000 in damages from the other man and report the affair to her company. Only then would I consider reconciliation, but we would no longer live together. She would stay under house arrest at her parents' home. Naturally, she couldn't meet these conditions and gave up. She started talking about her affair. I refused and said, "I already know. I've already known the details." The other man was a 23-year-old part-time student at the company where she worked, and he had a girlfriend. Eventually, we settled for a divorce with no division of assets, just alimony. As for the other man, I confronted him at his home during dinner time and negotiated with his family. They were shocked, saying, "I can't believe our son would do this." So I showed them the evidence and demanded $30,000 for damages, explaining the seriousness of destroying a family. His father called it extortion and threatened to sue. My lawyer said, "Then we'll see you in court." And we left. The next day, they kept calling, but I ignored them. A week later, his father, now represented by a lawyer, contacted my lawyer. Since they only asked for a reduction in the amount, we were unable to reach a settlement, and my lawyer finally ended the discussion by saying, "This is no longer an issue that can be resolved through a settlement, so we will proceed to court." 3 days later, their lawyer contacted me and pleaded to reduce the amount to $12,000. However, without taking a step back, we replied, saying, "The court will notify you, so please refrain from making any negotiations until then." In panic, they offered $15,000 instead. My lawyer said, "It's not about the money, but the sincerity of your apology. Haggling over the amount shows you're not truly sorry. If you can't have a constructive conversation, please refrain from contacting us." Finally, they agreed to pay the full $30,000 by selling their car and other valuables. The man, his father, and even his mother shaved their heads as a sign of apology, which I found quite shocking. After all this, I dropped the lawsuit and settled the matter. A year later, he paid $10,000 in damages to his former girlfriend and chose to break up with her. Although the man and the girlfriend weren't officially engaged, they were technically there in their relationship. They eventually got married. However, soon after, his ex-fiancée turned out to be pregnant. He seemed torn between her and Sarah for a while. Sarah also became pregnant. The situation escalated with his ex-fiancée's father storming their house and police being involved, but I don't know what happened after that. Sarah, now separated from her husband soon after giving birth to their baby, came begging for help, asking for $10,000, but I turned her away, saying, "I have no money to lend to a stranger who deceives people." At first, I had high hopes for my marriage with Sarah, but it quickly turned to despair. I regret not vetting her more thoroughly before getting married. However, enduring the marriage and ultimately getting some alimony and retribution against her was a small consolation. What happens to her life now is none of my concern, but I'm considering adding a restraining order, which she initially proposed.